Greetings and welcome to the Connect the Dots video series. My name is Ron King. This is video 2 of 2, where I discuss the book Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World by David Epstein. In the first video, we talked about the dichotomy between Roger and Tiger, sports icons, that the author used as a binary or an extreme examples of specialization, Tiger, and more of an experimenter or more of a generalist, Roger. And we talked about these topics in video 1. I encourage you to go back to video 1, where we also discussed the framework and the rationale for our series. In this video, we'll talk about the remaining chapters in this book, and we'll end with the strong recommendation the author makes about expanding your range. We see here the framework that we offered in the first video, and the item of interest in chapter 6, the trouble with too much grit is grit. And the idea is, if you're an experimenter, if you're someone who does a variety of things, when do you decide to pivot and change what you're doing or stay the course? This is a very fundamental question if you are in the world as recommended by our author to experiment. And match quality is a concept the author talks about, which he describes this way. It is the degree of fit between the work someone does and who they are, their abilities and proclivities. And this quote comes from 128. And the idea is match quality is the endeavor to try to learn what is your purpose, what is your North Star as you go through the choices you make. And I think Seth Godin, who is quoted in the book, really captures it when he writes, "We fail when we stick with tasks we don't have the guts to quit. The important trick is staying attuned to whether switching is simply a failure of perseverance or astute recognition that better matches are available." I really think this may be the most interesting site in the book, that really this idea of grit, do you stay the course or do you persevere, or pivot, really captured here by Seth's quote. Chapter 7, flirting with your possible selves. And again, this is perspective or worldview. And the argument here is that as we go through time, we really change and we become different. And it's a little bit hard to kind of really come to grips with that, but pretty good evidence that as we change, our ability to see forward and backward isn't symmetric. And he raises this concept called the end of history illusion, which is a very interesting idea. And he says, from teenagers to senior citizens, we recognize that our desires and motivations sure changed a lot in the past. So we're looking back, we see that we changed a lot. But when we look forward, we'll believe that they will not change much in the future. And so this end of history illusion is that when we look back, we say, wow, I did a lot of stuff, things changed, but now I'm where I'm at. And going forward, the steady state, the status quo, is going to be maintained. And really, this is a perception many of us share, probably not an accurate perception. So he then goes on and says, who do I really want to become? Rather than a grand plan, that is, we at some point say, look down in the future and say, here's our grand plan, find experiments that can be undertaken quickly, test and learn, not plan and implement. So I think chapter 7 is really one of my favorites in the book. I encourage you to take a look at it. Chapter 8 is the outsider advantage. The name of this chapter really says it all. It says outside in thinking, finding solution experience far outside focused training for the problem itself is what outside in thinking is. And he says that outside in thinking really is a valuable thing when we have information specialists. Because if you've got a lot of information created or insights created by specialists, then if you allow curious dilettantes, people who don't have that expertise, to contribute, by merging strands of widely available but disparate information. So he said, when you pick a team, consider this outside advantage, having somebody who has this outside-in thinking. Lateral thinking with withered technology. And what he means here is that are there cases where technology has been for a long time, it's sort of become really deeply ingrained in society? Can we re-look at that withered technology with a new eye and build something grand? And he creates, again, some ideas of business where individuals really became elite, became very notable business people by reusing withered technology. And he said, serial entrepreneur or innovators repeatedly claim they themselves to be screened out under their company's current hiring practices because they don't bring this specialization that he wants. And he said, when you face uncertain environments and wicked problems, the breadth of experience is so valuable. And especially when you are trying to implement withered technology, old tire technology, but tire technology can really be put together in a unique way if you bring in outside perspectives. Chapter 10, Fooled by Expertise. And here, again, we're talking about perspective. He's going to characterize two types of individuals. This is crafted by a researcher, Professor Tetlog, and he's going to contrast hedgehogs with foxes. So narrow view hedgehoggers are those people who know one big thing. And he contrasts that with integrator foxes, the type of person who knows many little things. And the claim he makes is that both foxes and hedgehogs update their beliefs quickly after they make successful predictions. And this reinforces them strongly. But when surprised, that is, where their predictions weren't borne out by reality, foxes likely adjust, hedgehogs do not. So in other words, what he's saying is if you're a hedgehog, that you know one big thing, you tend not to update your prediction when you find evidence to the contrary that maybe goes in contradiction of your big idea. Chapter 11, learning to drop your familiar tools. And again, this chapter deals with education, grit, and perspective. And he writes plenty of profiles of individual businesses. Again, now we're business, not individuals. Were written in support of coherence, that everyone is speaking the same language, singing from the same hymnal, but no empirical evidence that there was any measure of organizational success. So he's making the case here that sometimes companies really push coherence, that everyone, again, shares the same vision. But he makes the case that actually, if you have some level of ambiguity, that different points of view, it can actually broaden an organizational toolbox that is quite unique. Now, I think this is a delicate balance. I think one needs to decide that we need a company that has coherence in terms of culture, but still can disagree with regards to ideas. So if you and I disagree on an idea, you might think my idea is stupid, but you don't think I'm stupid. And so the idea is that we can have interpersonal relations that are very solid, yet we are able to disagree very vehemently on our ideas. And that's really the important part. If you've got people with different points of view, different specialization, or a more broad perspective, that we can have a coherent culture, yet with a incoherence of ideas. Deliberate amateurs. Here, he's talking about creating an innovation ecosystem. And what he's saying is when you think about this, if you build conferences or places that are headquartered for startups, incubators, that trying to build small businesses, the reality is we want density and we want people who really have the energy, but it may be a good idea to populate these incubators, these accelerators, not with just very, very specialized people of the same sort, but preserve range and inefficiency. I know in the university, there's great value by having an intermix of areas. So the finance people and the accounting people and the econ people share space where they bring to bear their different points of ideas. This really does contribute to creativity. The author goes on to say, at its core, all hyper-specialization, again, that's getting in a track and staying there, is a well-meaning drive for efficiency, but, and his argument is, inefficiency needs cultivating too. Now, this is a concept that you may want to go and study more from the author's point of view. Not sure I fully understand why it has to be inefficient, but he makes this case that if we focus so much on optimization and maximization, that somehow we remove the slack that allows people to be creative, which isn't necessarily a linear process. Conclusions. Expanding your range. I found this last chapter very interesting. If you don't get to read the whole book, I'd encourage you to take a look at this book. And again, he's talking to people who have goals in their pursuits of lots of different domains. So we see sports, games, creative arts, science, healthcare, business, forecasters. The author has given anecdotes about each of these where somebody made a choice to go one direction or the other. And then he paints the picture, tells the stories, they go over time, and he comes back repeatedly to identify the benefit of this experimentation process. And the one sentence of advice that he gives, presented in this last conclusion paragraph, don't feel behind. And he's saying if we see people who have a head start, or maybe an education, or whatever progress, that it's possible to catch up. So his advice is don't compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to yourself yesterday, not to people who aren't you. Everyone progresses at a different rate. So don't let anyone tell you that you should feel behind. And now this is a very optimistic perspective. So the overall arch of the arguments this author is making is that if you want to pursue excellence, there are different mindsets you might have. Certainly contextual matters, but keep the mindset for experimentation. So if we can close our discussion here with where we started with a quick overview, this author wanted to look at the binary choice between specialization and generalization or experiment, and also called range, but it's basically a generalist. And you want to think about who you want to become. He walks us through various domains where he encourages us to build a mindset to try new things rather than to pick a lane and get in. And again, there are a lot of elements here: head start, education, grit, perspective that we have to think about as we think about that journey. Said he writes for a data-driven group of people. I think he does a nice job on his analysis and supporting it, and he provides a very teacher-centric mentality in the way he writes. So that brings us to the end of our discussion of the range. Look forward to hearing your comments if you have any.